Right, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone who's been to Comedy Unleashed would know it's usually ladies, gentlemen, and people who can't decide what their gender is. Please welcome to the stage. You have a fantastic array of comedians in front of you here. We have Nick Dixon, Dominic Frisby, Paul Cox, Cressida Wetton, Simon Evans, and Ethan Davies. Green. And the reason I got that name wrong is he's not a comedian. He's actually a writer in ancient Roman something or other. Yeah. And he's... Very well informed. Now, have you all been to a balloon debate before? No. Okay, so you've no idea what it is. Okay, so the hypothetical situation is that there are 6 people here who have all chosen, for their own reason, who they think is the world's best ever comic genius. The balloon is descending because it's running out of gas. And throughout the process, we have to throw people out of the balloon to save one person. So you will be deciding who gets chucked out of the balloon at 2 points throughout this process. So we will open up, the guys will open up with 5 minutes to lay out their case for who they think is the world's best ever comic genius ever. And then I will throw it open to the floor, and you can challenge them, give your own anecdotes, criticize them, say whatever you think around the 6 people that they've chosen. Then we will take it out to a vote, and you will vote. And you can vote several times, but obviously don't vote for everybody. The people who get the least number of votes, 3 of them will be chucked out of the balloon. Then we'll bring the last 3 back, who will quickly lay out their case. Over to you guys, and then right at the end, there will be a final vote for the best comic genius in the world ever. And they have chosen whoever it is for their own reasons, whether it is they have the most impact, they're the cleverest, the best satirist, the best writer, or what have you. And it's a mixture of stand-up comics and comic writers. So, without further ado, I would like... Sorry, Dominic.
Can you start at that end?
The winner gets, what do comedians most want?
I haven't written money.
God, what a cynical audience. They want adulation. They want a standing ovation from you guys. And hopefully that's what the winner will get, because there's no money in it.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, can you start at that end? Because I haven't written mine yet. And
We're going to skip you. We're going to start because this guy wants it last. So, Nick, are you all right to go first?
Yeah, I'm fine. I've written mine.
That's great. So, first up is the utterly wonderful Mr. Nick Dixon.
All right. Thank you for coming, everyone. Thank you very much. Can you hear me and all that? I feel like a press conference. The allegations are false. So, apparently I wasn't allowed to pick myself, so that's a pity. But so I picked Norm Macdonald as the greatest comedian of all time. Yes! Winning already. Now, apparently, we were originally given 3 minutes to do this. It's very hard because it takes about 3 minutes to tell one Norm Macdonald joke. But now it's apparently 5 minutes, so I'm going to stop wasting time and go for it. This isn't going to be funny, though, because there's nothing less funny than talking about comedy, as I now endeavour to prove over 5 minutes. But I'm trying to win this thing, so let's get on with it. So Norm Macdonald... The great thing about Norm is he is the greatest of all time because he can do any medium. So he could do stand-up famously, and his stand-up bits stack up against anyone in history. Some of you remember the famous Alcoholics Anonymous bit where he says you'll tell you anything except their last name. Basically, like, you know, I once blew a dog for a pint of gin. You're not getting my last name. These are classic bits. If you haven't seen them, you can't recreate them now. I've just tried. And he would tackle the biggest themes: suicide, illness, death. And his stand-up is up there with anyone in the world. But he can also do the talk shows. You've got the famous Moth joke, which is like a Dostoevsky novel mixed with a dad joke. You've got the famous deeply closeted homosexual bit. Has anyone seen that? Yeah. When he'd say, I'm a deeply closeted homosexual. Like, oh, what's your gay? He's like, hey, buddy, I'm not saying that. So he's got these seminal bits. He's got the gay pride joke, which I'm not going to go into now, but it's very good. He's got, he did the SNL Weekend Update, and he was the funniest of all time. He did the OJ jokes because he was a totally fearless, irreverent comic. He got sacked from SNL by the manager and came back a year and a half later and hosted it and took the piss out of SNL, which is an iconic moment because they said he wasn't funny. So he goes, maybe I've just got funny. And then he goes, oh no, it's not that. It's that the show's got worse. So he goes, the bad news is I'm still not funny. The good news is the show blows. Imagine doing that at the start of SNL. So this is what we want from a comic: total irreverence, total just genius. And he also could do roast. He had the viral roasting where they did a roast, but he just told 1950s jokes from an old joke book. Like, ladies and gentlemen, this man is for the birds, and no one understood what he was doing. But it was this transcendent kind of anti-comedy that he could also do, sort of Kaufman-esque. His book was hilarious. His podcast was the funniest thing of all time, I maintain. This is before Netflix ruined it, when it was on YouTube. And he would just do extraordinary things, like he would insist that his co-host was a Holocaust denier, because Norm saw how funny Holocaust denial is, guys. And or you could say he was so good he could make it funny. And he had to do things like he'd have Stephen Merchant on, just from The Office, and just randomly go, "Now, I know you're big friends with David Irving." And then he'd go like, we all have a different number. I'd say 6 million. My co-host says 600. You'd say probably somewhere in between those two numbers. What a thing to say to Stephen Merchant. And if you understand why that's the funniest thing ever, then you know why I'm right. So some people today may pick people who are writers, who are, of course, disqualified immediately because they're only writers. Norm is a writer and performer. So sorry, Simon said he was going to go game theory, so I'm getting him first. You've got people who may mention people who are very sort of good for English audiences, but Norm goes across the whole Anglosphere and probably the whole world. He also has a depth of character to his... That's just who he was as a person. Like, comedians like Louis C.K. are very good technically, but they're sort of nihilists, they're atheists. Norm believed in God, he wrestled with the big questions. People like Louis, he said that Hillary Clinton was a good person, lol. So whereas Norm had sympathy for Trump, so he was against the grain politically as well. So he was a deep thinker who never just went with the obvious thing. And for all those reasons, I say he's the greatest of all time. And he's the only one obviously I despise comedy now, I've retired. I hate the industry. Just looking at comedians makes me physically sick. So it's a tough panel today for me, obviously. But Norm is the only one I can still watch because he is the greatest of all time. And obviously I'm second. Thank you very much. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Nick. And now, Paul Cox.
Oh, fair enough. Good afternoon. That's me done. Good afternoon, colleagues, and I have used a microphone before, you'd imagine. Good afternoon. Yep. Well, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about John Sullivan. Does everybody know who John Sullivan is? Yes. Great. Okay. That's about 80% of the room that I need to win over. Now, I'm hoping that you'll agree that Only Fools and Horses is one of the greatest sitcoms, particularly to come out of this country, if not in the world. In my eyes, it is. And there are two words to describe why Only Fools and Horses was such a success, and they are John Sullivan. Now, Only Fools and Horses invokes, for me, and I'd imagine many of you that remember it, marvellous, happy Christmas moments where we're gathered around the television at Christmas when television was still a thing. You didn't do things like that for Steptoe and Son, for instance. Nobody was interested. It was all in black and white. Nobody was interested in seeing a man in the bath, no matter how dirty he was. But John Sullivan is, for me, a man of the people. He was born in South London, and we're not going to hold that against him. That was just what a happenstance for him. But because he was in and around the characters that he was able to so beautifully create within the Only Fools and Horses series. So for me, his genius was about being able to make people both laugh and cry. Something that you don't want to do as a stand-up comedian, but you probably want to do as a writer, I believe, because we can all remember, hopefully, give me a cheer if you remember at least one storyline or catchphrase or something from Only Fools and Horses. Yay. Smashing. So I am preaching to the slightly converted. Yeah, so John Sullivan's genius was to be able to make people laugh and cry. And we all remember those moments, those seminal moments for Only Fools and Horses where Del Boy falls through the bar or Grandad loosens the wrong priceless chandelier. But we also remember the fact that Del Boy confronted Rodney in the lift about Cassandra's miscarriage, or that he spoke to his past mother when his son was born. And this, I believe, was a unique ability for only John Sullivan, in the sense that he was able to make these subjects relatable to millions of people and never missing the opportunity to draw a laugh from the most difficult and unfortunate of circumstances. And geniuses are remembered, I think, for the way they stand the test of time. And Norm Macdonald, very funny. Is he going to stand the test of time? Are people going to talk about Norm Macdonald in 30 years after he's passed? They may well do in cliques and the dark clubs that Nick frequents. But I think Only Fools and Horses is something that's pulled a lot, particularly the British public. They pulled a lot of the British public together. We all remember the quotes, the long-standing jokes, the lovely jubblies, the bonnet de douches. But for me, it was the malproposisms that John Sullivan wrote. By the way, that's the misuse of words and phrases. Sorry, I was talking to Simon, he might not understand. And I'm sure he does. The sort of, to give you for an example, it was like St Paul's journey on the road to Damascus, or as Macbeth said to Hamlet in Midsummer Night's Dream, "We've been done up like a couple of kippers, Robin." But John Sullivan is not all about catchphrases, as memorable as they were. John Sullivan is a king of that most underappreciated breed for me. He is the king of the working class heroes. And he was able to champion that in such a delicious way that we are all able to remember it today. And when you're thinking about who you're voting for in a minute, I want you just to think about what memories Only Fools and Horses gave you. Did it make you laugh? And remember John Sullivan in that. That's me.
Thank you, Paul. And now Cressida Wetton.
Hello. I don't know if you can hear me. I've got a bit of a cold, so I sound sexy. That's what I think it means. Anyway, so we had to talk about who the greatest comedian of all time was, and I was thinking, well, if you're trying to pick the best comedy, it's like, what's the ailment? To me, comedy is a series of medicines for when things go wrong. And if you were having a strained family Christmas, I don't know, maybe Mrs. Brown's Boys would be the right answer. I don't know. I'm told that if you're looking after an 18-month-year-old, Peekaboo is still at number one. It really depends. Apparently some people like puns. That's still a thing. But for me, it's all about solving loneliness. I think the reason we have comedy is because life is just a horrific cosmic joke. I think that might be Norm's, actually. And so it's what makes me feel less lonely. How do we find someone that can do that? And for me, it's Louis C.K. I feel like after I've watched Louis C.K., I might be allowed in the human race after all. We all know that we're a scumbag, don't we? We all know we're a scumbag. We don't want people to know about it, and we try and hide it all the time, but we've all seen ourselves, in public saying, yeah, mostly eating eggs for breakfast at the moment. Yeah, Easter eggs. We tell lies all the time. Oh, I didn't set the timer, Andy. I'm so sorry. I've pressed the wrong.
That's 1 minute.
Are you timing me? Do it. Okay, apologies. I have no sense of time now. I pressed the wrong button. I just feel that when Louis C.K. tells us what a disgusting person he is, I find that very, very soothing, and mostly in life, just surrounded by people on Instagram trying to say everything's brilliant, and it isn't. I'm on all the horror dating apps. It's just an endless supply of people saying, I'm always happy. It's like, Christ, Ted Bundy had a better emotional range than that. Like, I want someone that can tell me how bad things are, I met somebody earlier this year, and he was relentlessly positive. And at first, I thought, well, he's American. Maybe that's the excuse. I don't know. And he would say sort of things like, "Look, not everybody in IKEA is having a terrible time." And I just used to think, no, that's awful. Like, I pictured myself 10 years hence in a veterinary surgery, crying my eyes out with him saying, "Not everybody's puppy got put down today." I don't want to hear that level of positivity. I think people like that, or Alain de Botton calls a callous sentimentalist. So Louis C.K. opens his chest and he tells us fearlessly, I'm a scumbag, and all the scum that I feel about myself is washed away like a sin in a confession booth. He serves as some sort of cleansing ritual. Incidentally, the funniest thing I ever saw on a dating app was somebody, some of these apps have prompts, they say, after work you can find me. And this guy said, after work you can find me laying down in a gutter being sick. But don't worry, ladies, I don't go to work often. And I thought that was really funny. I'd love to have met that guy. I don't know what it is about me that enjoys Louis C.K. so much. Obviously, stereotypes are unfashionable, but I suffer from a syndrome called Northern Dad. And recently, when Alex Salmond died, I know that's terribly sad, but I felt this kind of envy because he died. No, it's not that bad. I felt an envy of the way he died because he was doing what he liked doing, and the next thing you know, he's dead. And I thought that's brilliant. And it reminded me of my dad. Whenever he swats a wasp, he does it. And we have to have this moment where he says, "Well, I can only hope that when my time comes, it's as swift." And I think I just belong in a very miserable part of human society, really. I don't know. I'm sorry. All right, I'll just finish on this. I know some people. One of my colleagues said, you'll have to address it. Address what? Address what he did. So for those people who know about what Louis C.K. did, I'm a bit like the Friends fans who shout, they were on a break. I'm like, he asked. I sort of think of him as a very committed feminist. He's one of the few people that thinks that women can make a decision and stick to it. Enormously flattering. So bizarrely for me, not only is he the funniest comedian in the world, he's also one of the men I would feel safest with. Thank you.
And next up, Simon Evans.
Thank you. Okay, I will start my clock. Okay, we're off. Yes, I have chosen Ray Galton and Alan Simpson, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Most famously known for Hancock's Half Hour and Steptoe and Son, both of which they created. To get this out of the way straight off the bat, they are the only writing duo that you have to select from this evening. And so from a purely logistical point of view, if you're trying to keep the balloon afloat, it probably makes sense to chuck them out first. I get that. And if that is your choice on that basis, I won't demur. They were both pretty thick set as individuals, and as a combination, they were a unit. So that's fair enough. But what else? For those of you unaware of the contribution of those two major shows, Hancock and Steptoe and Son, to be honest with you, I'm unlikely to be able to persuade you that they are the funniest thing ever written, or even that they might be worth half an hour of your time in front of YouTube. They were older than me, 60, 65 years ago, and most humour, if I'm absolutely honest, especially spoken, especially live humour, very little stand-up, stands up. Most of us feel a degree of cringe watching Chaplin now, who was acclaimed as the greatest genius ever. I get, Norm Macdonald and Louis C.K., they're very contemporary. Who knows how things will change, and maybe they will stand the test of time. But most comedy is a pretty fragile flower, if I'm honest. And it is, as Cressida says, extraordinarily subjective. I don't think there's anything more subjective, in fact, to the extent that people get actively angry if forced to watch comedy they don't get. If you find people in a room full of an audience all laughing at a comedian and one person doesn't get it, they get incandescent with rage. They feel there's some horrible joke being played on them, that everyone else knows this is shit and they can't understand it. So I tried to choose a different criteria for greatest, and it is this. Who had such genius? There's a famous quote of Schopenhauer, talent hits a target others cannot hit, but genius hits a target others cannot see. And Galton and Simpson did that. With Hancock and with Steptoe, they created a brand new genre. They essentially created British sitcom, as we still understand it to this day, and they understood the inherent comedy and pathos of the sheer misery of existence, especially in post-war Britain. Nowadays there were whole magazines, like Modern Review was essentially launched to support the proposition that Galton and Simpson deserved to be spoken of in the same breath as Samuel Beckett and John Osborne and the Sartre, the existential, the howling bleakness of the despair that they confront and wring jokes out of is absolutely extraordinary. There are the occasional line or two that still stand up, but it's more a capturing of a vernacular rather than extraordinary wit. One of my favourites that always crosses my mind when the appropriate moment arises. I thought my mother was a bad cook, but at least her gravy used to move about a bit. I mean, lines like that, they're sort of miraculous. There's a kind of alchemy to that. It's not witty, it's just, it captures something so deep in the soul. Whether you say you watch a whole episode of Steptoe now, the pacing by if you've been trained and acculturated by Modern Family or even Friends, you'll think it drags. You'll think get on with it, But that's how things move on. Would Pushkas now make a World 11? Would Georgie Best even? Would Ronaldo still be stopped by Bobby Moore? I don't think so. You've got to take people in their time and place. They created the foundation. They created the concrete on which the whole edifice of British sitcom was built. And that, for me, is our single greatest comedic or even possibly cultural legacy of my lifetime. People often ask me as a stand-up, who's your favourite stand-up of all time? And I struggle, to be honest. I've seen some great gigs, but, if you really want to ask me what inspired me, what gave me succour, what salved me throughout my childhood, what did I watch my dad laugh at after a hard day at work? What did I watch his shoulders drop and his face relax in front of? It was Norman Stanley Fletcher and Basil and Sybil Fawlty and Rigsby and Margot and Jerry Ledbetter and Tom and Barbara Good and Del Boy and Rodney and Hyacinth Bouquet and Edmund Blackadder and Sir Humphrey and Jim Hacker and Reggie Perrin and Victor Meldrew, and they are all standing on the shoulders of the two giants that I present to you today as the greatest geniuses of post-war British comedy, Galton and Simpson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. And now Dominic Frisby.
Hello, everyone. So I was torn as to who to go for, and at first I was thinking to go with P.G. Wodehouse, the greatest master of the written word in English comic history, in my view, brought me a great deal of happiness during sad times. But he wasn't really a performer. I thought about Stan Laurel, great performer, great writer as well. Larry David, great performer, great writer. I thought about Rob Reiner, but he's mainly only a director, but he directed, some of the funniest films of all time, Spinal Tap, Princess Bride. I thought about going with Peter Sellers, possibly the single greatest performer, Inspector Clouseau being there, two of the greatest performances you'll ever see. I even thought of Gilbert and Sullivan, or Gilbert specifically, and Noel Coward for their brilliant lyrics. But I've decided you've got to go with someone. If he's the greatest of all time, he's got to be a writer, he's got to be a performer, and he's got to be across multiple comic genres. So there's so many, there's sitcom, there's comic acting, there's brilliant stand-up, there's brilliant films, there's physical comedy, there's intellectual comedy. Who crosses all of these things? And the problem with if we think of great musicians, a lot of the musicians who we think were the greatest ever or the greatest musical performers, Michael Jackson, John Lennon, Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, Jim Morrison, Buddy Holly, they all died when they were young. And the mistake that this man has made is not dying. He stayed with us. So I'm going to go with this man in his prime, which we will say is between the mid to late 60s and 1980. And the man I'm going to go with is John Cleese. And if you do a poll, what is the greatest comic film of all time? Repeatedly, Life of Brian comes top. And John Cleese, I argue, was the main man in the funniest bits of Life of Brian. Biggest Dickus, what have the Romans ever done for us? The Latin lesson when he makes him write all the graffiti on the wall. The People's Front of Judea. I mean, how prophetic was the People's Front of Judea? John Cleese wrote those sketches, and his performance of them brought them to life. There you go. Then we have, greatest film of all time. Greatest sketch show of all time. Repeatedly again, Monty Python gets it. And then you think of the greatest Monty Python sketches. Ministry of Silly Walks, The Argument Clinic, The Dead Parrot, The Philosopher's Football, one of the later ones, just brilliant. Cleese was instrumental to all of them. And then finally, you have what is the greatest sitcom of all time, and this one wins it ahead more consistently than Life of Brian and Monty Python do, and that is, of course, Fawlty Towers. And what is so brilliant about Fawlty Towers is it's a marriage between the two. It's a marriage between theatre and the traditions of farce. And you look at other sitcoms, they were character comedies. Fawlty Towers was pure farce, which is comedy in its most distilled form. And it's got some of the most brilliant physical comedy you will ever see. Cleese was a brilliant physical comedian. up there with Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton and people like that. Ministry of City Walks, Silly Walks, the Germans, all of that. But he was also a brilliant intellect. You can't, he wasn't just some lowbrow clown. He's Cambridge educated. Some of the jokes he did were highly intellectual and witty, brilliantly satirical. And then you look at so many of the phrases of Fawlty Towers, Monty Python, and other things that Cleese have done. They have entered the lexicon. They have become part of the national language. And obviously, comedy dies over time. You just need to look at Shakespeare, greatest writer ever. The comedies work as stories, but the gags, when you've got like Falstaff doing his gags or the clowns doing his gags, literally, it's not even that nobody finds them funny. Nobody even understands them. If anyone laughs at those, they're just pretending to be cleverer than you. But Cleese's stuff, it's dating slightly, but much of it has stood the test of time. And physical comedy tends to stand the test of time in a way that's why Laurel and Hardy, we can still watch them and find them funny, in a way that, satirical comedy tends to die. But of course, Cleese was a brilliant satirist and was involved in some of the great satire of the 60s as well. So, all-rounder, contributor, and the other thing is he made it big in the States. A lot of Americans, we say the Americans don't understand irony, but it's actually very rare for British comedians to make it in the States. Cleese did.
Thank you, Dominic. And Ethan Green.
Right, can people actually hear me without a microphone? Yes. Perfect. So I've got a confession I'm going to make today, which is that I'm not actually going to be arguing in defence of Rowan Atkinson. I'm instead going to be arguing in defence of my friend Nick Dixon. Because I agree with him that he's the second best comedian of all time. And I thought it'd be quite amusing for him to have to argue against himself. Except I would have done that, but then I thought actually maybe Keir Starmer would be the funniest comedian of all time. See? While some of you are thinking about Trump, for instance, who wants to build a wall and get Mexico to pay for it, Keir Starmer decides to sell off our islands, bring in their asylum seekers, and then get us to pay for it. But despite all of that, I actually am going to be arguing for Rowan Atkinson. And I've got 3 arguments for why I think that's the case. So the first one is that I think he has the best range of comedy here. We've heard already from some of the panelists about how it's important to have a range of comedic styles. But is there really any greater diversity in a comedic style than Blackadder on one hand and Mr. Bean on the other? See, this is someone who clearly has a mastery of all of the types of comedy. From, let's a good example, his stand-up is hilarious, where he plays everything from Toby the Devil. Some of you might have heard the Jews were right. While simultaneously also playing, inebriated Indian housekeepers and restaurateurs. Moreover, the other thing about Rowan Atkinson, which I really appreciate, is the subtlety of his performance. It's not just simply that he has good dialogue and wit, but he can make very minor things funny. We've heard from some of the panelists, they repeat some of the lines and they're very funny. I repeat some of the lines, they're less funny. But that's because Rowan Atkinson, it's his articulation, his performance, which also makes it so great, right? Just the ability to say Bob and make people laugh. There you go. So that is the first reason why I think Rowan Atkinson is great. And you can also see this, by the way, when he actually performs a sketch with John Cleese, because they get John Cleese to be the straight man. So they realise that when it comes to whoever's the better comedian and who can actually get the laughs, unfortunately, it's Rowan Atkinson. So the second reason, and I think this is even more important, which is that Rowan Atkinson actually defends the virtues and values of what comedy is meant to represent. Because what is comedy meant to be? It's meant to be a way to satirise society, to speak truth to power, to undermine and criticise things which you can't say in other ways. And that's why censors go for the comedians first, because when you laugh, you can't help it. You laugh because it's true. And in this climate of free speech, there is no one who has been a more ardent and better defender of free speech than Rowan Atkinson. All the way back in 2005, he's been leading organisations which have been fighting against blasphemy laws, general censorship, and he's been doing so in a very effective way. If you type free speech into YouTube and you sort it by view count, 2 of the top 5 videos are speeches by Rowan Atkinson defending the importance of free expression and free speech. So when it comes to maintaining that social role of the court jester from which most of our classical tradition comes from, there is no one better than Rowan Atkinson. And also he does it proactively, right? It's not like when the cancel mob comes for John Cleese because he says something dodgy on Twitter. Rowan Atkinson's been doing it because he actually believes in the values and the principles. It's not just reactive. And then my third and final key reason for why I believe Rowan Atkinson is really important is because I'm not a comedian. I'm like you guys. I'm just a member of the public. And comedy, I think as we can mostly agree, is subjective. There is no objective preference of what's better in comedy. So let's go and see what the public think is the best type of comedy. So again, I searched up view ratings of different comedians. And with Louis C.K., you're on about 19 million for their best watched video. For some of the other comedians, like John Cleese, you're on about 27 million, 24 if you discount the other Pythons. Then with Norm Macdonald, you do actually get a bit of a jump. You get to about 42 million, so again, that's pretty good. Then when you search Rowan Atkinson, you get 120 million for the first one, 119 million for the second, and 118 million for the third. So Rowan Atkinson, in terms of his comedy actually penetrating and people liking it, is three times more popular than any of the other comedians here. So Rowan Atkinson is not just the funniest comedian in terms of people actually liking his comedy. He's the best when it comes to defending the social values and leveraging his reputation as a comedian to defending what comedians should do. And on top of that, he's able to master all of the genres of comedy, not just pretend oh, you can do sitcoms and stand-up, which is fairly similar. He can do physical comedy, but both big bits as Mr. Bean. He can do little quivers with his eyes as Blackadder, and he can do the verbal parts too. So thank you, and I hope to stay in this balloon as the non-comedian.
Well, thank you, Ethan, as you went outside the balloon, just hanging on to the basket there as you persuaded the audience. Right, now it's over to you guys. So is it, the comedian who can best find humour in the darkness of our soul, who established new genres? Is it writers? Is it stand-up? Over to you. Questions, your opinion, questions to anyone anyone on the panel. Tell us what you think.
I'm really torn because in my heart of hearts, I think Norm Macdonald is the funniest. Yes. And the world's first 2 gay guys is one of the funniest things I've ever heard.
Go with your heart.
Yeah, it made me laugh like nothing else I've ever heard. But on the other hand, I think John Sullivan wrote Only Fools and Horses, which annoyed Stuart Lee so much that he had to dedicate a whole sketch about how trite and predictable and boring it was. That, to me, suggests that there's a lot more to John Sullivan than may meet the eye. Can you expand on, pissing off other comedians as a criteria?
We should just mention before Paul does that we were told, each of us, that we were not allowed to pick Stuart Lee, because obviously otherwise we would all have just...
You'd all been wrong, though.
Overwhelming consensus.
It would have been wrong.
I was aware of the Stuart Lee thing, of course. It just seemed like easy, low-hanging fruit, Stuart Lee's a good comic, in his house. But he's the fact that he decided he's taken the mickey out of John Sullivan, he's taken the mickey out of Ricky Gervais. These are all people that Ethan talked about number of views. I'd imagine most of those, anyone we could mention has got. I don't really want to undermine Stuart Lee.
You just
no, I do. I seriously do. But, there's no comparison, so I don't want to bring that into the argument. But it's a great point. There is a lot more to John Sullivan. We were told early on in this that we had 3 minutes. I stuck to the 3 minutes just because I'm a stickler for the rules. I didn't feel like I needed any more than 3 minutes. I just wanted to say, John Sullivan, Only Fools and Horses, lovely jubbly, remember Christmas, jobs are good. Yeah.
Do we have to wait for a mic? It's good. Yeah. Start shouting until the mic arrives.
I can tell, while we're waiting for the mic, I can tell quite an interesting story about John Sullivan, if you like, which is, if you are a historian of the sitcom, you will find a series that was on ITV in the 1970s called Lucky Fella. And in those days, ITV never repeated their sitcoms, whereas BBC did. And so what would tend to happen is that ITV sitcoms would be forgotten. So if the BBC had never repeated Fawlty Towers, we wouldn't know about it. Fawlty Towers, the first run of the first series got hardly any viewers. With the second rerun, it doubled. With the third rerun, it doubled again. And with the fourth rerun, that's when it got into the 20 million level. So because of the BBC policy, we remember BBC sitcoms in a way that we don't remember ITV sitcoms. But in any case, there was this sitcom called Lucky Fella. And it was not set in Peckham, it was set in Brockley, which is the next town up the road. And it was about two brothers, two Cockney brothers trying to get on in life. And one of the brothers was played by David Jason. And the difference is that in this one, David Jason was the idiotic brother and the other guy was the cleverer of the two. And the series was so similar that David Jason even drove around in a little yellow bubble car, identical to the one you see in Fawlty Towers. And it was all set in a council flat, identical, because council flats were pretty homogenous in those days, so they all looked pretty similar. But it was, and historians now say it was a forerunner of Only Fools and Horses, but it was very, very similar. And it even has this gag in it where David Jason's trying to impress this girl and he leans back against the bar and the guy has opened the thing on the bar and David Jason falls through the bar. They're that close. And I know all of this because my dad wrote it.
While we're on that subject, my dad came up with Trigger's broom as well, years before that. True story.
I'm Team Norm, absolutely. But I'd just like to add some other names because Norm always liked company, you know. Samuel Beckett is one of the names which Galton and Simpson have obviously been compared to. Only he's like they're funny, and you know people like watching Galton and Simpson, and was even recreated by Paul Merton, I think, in the 80s or 90s. But the real key couple that I want to mention are two fictitious people, which is Horace and Pete's. Horace and Pete's, to me, is the greatest creation in sitcom by Louis C.K. You know, that's the greatest argument for him, surely, to be in the basket and stay there.
Are you talking about that boring play?
Horace and Pete's?
Yeah, it's that boring play Louis did when he became self-indulgent.
Well, you know,
sorry,
I mean,
I'm trying to win.
I am Team Norm. I am Team Norm. However,
oh, good. Oh, sorry, I take it back.
All right, okay. But Horace and Pete's, everybody watch it. It's not a boring play.
It's all right. It's all right. Oh, I just want to quickly jump in to what we heard about the ITV not repeating their sitcoms. Are you aware of what the first sitcom?
Mike.
Not working?
Mike's not great.
That one doesn't seem to be working. Don't know.
Okay, can you guys hear me anyway? Yeah. Great. So, are you aware? Oh, now it's working. Are you aware of what the first sitcom was that made ITV have to break its repeat policy?
Rising Damp?
Yeah. Hey. Did John please?
Come on, another one.
It's just turned
Fireworks completely pissed on.
Yeah. It's turned into a pub quiz.
Thank you very much. Now I have started listening about the balloon. I thought the first ones I thought would be the heaviest ones, but improve the chance of the others. But actually, the points that were raised, one thing that Ron Atkinson is not just that he's going to cross the boundaries of time. He has already crossed the boundaries of space because, you know, as you can guess from my accent, I'm not British. I'm Iranian. And when we were growing up, and apart from the silent era comedians that we used to watch as when growing up, when bombs were dropping around us like Harold Lloyd and Chaplin, and they again took the tiredness of the day away from us. Ron Atkinson was one of them. That he had a great following in so he did cross the boundaries of culture in a way that other ones didn't.
Is your argument that Ron Atkinson is Ron, by the way?
Said Ron. I'm changing mine to Ron Atkinson. The great manager, some interesting opinions. Go on, Paul.
He was right.
Is the best comic genius for a war zone? Because
But can he do it at Stoke on a cold Tuesday night? Sorry.
I think
it's a football joke.
the point you're making, though, is
is this on?
that verbal comedy, i.e. comedy with words, is limited by language, whereas physical comedy, yeah.
So can you explain verbal comedy? It's like really struggling down this.
Basically, words suck is your position.
I wasn't entirely sure you would get it, Simon, and that's why I said what I said. I was trying to make it easy for you, but anyway. But physical comedy, clowning comedy, visual comedy, i.e. stuff without words, Simon, is truly international, and therefore it's just so much more commercial than any other form of comedy. So if you want to make a lot of money doing comedy, do a physical act that has no words in it, so that can be done in any language, because it gives it a universality that
but it's a bit rubbish. It's a bit rubbish, isn't it?
Well, it depends. There's good.
Bean, as an adult.
There's good physical comedy and shit physical comedy, and I don't think, Mr. Bean was incredibly successful, but I don't think it was the greatest ever physical comedy. By no means, no.
Right. What is the greatest?
Marx Brothers. Okay.
I would say Laurel and Hardy, but.
But you can't do it anymore. Like Simon said, it doesn't stack up anymore, does it? Like even Chaplin. Do you go home and watch physical comedy? That's comedy. Just to be. And just to be clear, that's.
Look at the artist. The artist did very well.
Just to be clear, that's comedy without words. Do you go sans words?
There really isn't. There isn't that much of it that is good. It is one of the hardest forms of comedy to get right. But when you see physical comedy done live and it's good, it brings the house down. And there just really isn't. Men in Coats were a brilliant act in their day, and they could have gone huge and international, but they didn't. But it is possible to do, but it's very rare that you find a brilliant physical act.
You make an incredible case for Rowan Atkinson, but that's his guy, I think.
No, I don't think. I was just explaining. I was explaining why the Iranian gentleman loved Rowan Atkinson. I mean, I was explaining because of the nature of physical comedy.
No, that's definitely correct.
Okay, we're just staying on the theme of things having an international impact.
I was making such a simple point, and it became so long because
just banter. So I didn't realise banter was banned.
Ladies and gentlemen, is very grateful to you for explaining to me.
I was just making jokes. I didn't know they were banned on this panel.
That one as well.
I apologise.
Okay, we're just staying on the theme of international impact. So Galton and Simpson effectively invented the British sitcom. What impact did that have on American comedy?
They had two major. Let me tell you, there are two major things that they had an impact on. With Hancock, that was the very first time that the word situation comedy was used. It was used in an internal BBC memo, 31st of March 1953. I remember it because my dad's birthday, 31st of March. And that was the first time those two words were put together, situation comedy. So they invented that. And then when they wrote Steptoe and Son, that was the first situation comedy that used actors rather than a stand-up or otherwise like a musical end or somebody who had like a shtick. They used actors so that they were elevating the degree of realism or whatever. And both those things were Galton and Simpson's innovations. Mm-hmm. I cannot speak with absolute authority about the first time that those innovations were transferred to America. They had their own, third-rate.
Surely, Simon, situation comedy, to say that Galton and Simpson invented situation comedy, surely situation comedy was a product of the technology of the times, in that people had grown up in a theatrical environment, and then suddenly we had TV, and situation comedy was where TV and theatre meant. It was a new genre. You can't credit Galton and Simpson. They were brilliant writers, but you can't credit them with inventing the genre. They were just there at the right time as a bit like, YouTube and, the new media we have today has created new genres of comedy. So surely, I would argue that the genre is a product of the technology.
Possibly some truth to that. Yeah.
In America, you had Sanford and Son, so
the Steptoe and Son remake.
Yeah, so that's their work having an impact there.
Gary Shandling wrote on that. It was my second choice, maybe. Gary Shandling wrote on that until he got bored and moved on to stand-up, and then the seminal Larry Sanders Show. Sorry, carry on. I mean, concerning semen when I say seminal.
Okay.
My mic's not working. I'd be getting so many more laughs. Literally, metaphorically and literally, is this thing on? I don't think it is. I'm not convinced.
Okay. So do I understand it? The genius of Only Fools and Horses was it actually functioned as a microcosm. In the sense that Grandad was rock-solid Labour. Del Boy was a bit of a trippy-dippy kind of would-be liberal. I remember one issue he's holding a copy of Time Out magazine. And, of course, did I say Rodders, sorry, is would-be liberal. And Del Boy, with his braces, aspires to be good, true blue Tory. Again, it's more aspiring in both cases. But it is essentially a microcosm of Britain in the 80s. And the question I wonder is there an equivalent with Steptoe and Son and Hancock's Half Hour? Because it doesn't seem to me that there is.
Well, I would strongly dispute that there was any conscious attempt to represent the political spectre in that household. What it is and what they did absolutely inherit from Galton Simpson is that Del Boy is trapped. He's trapped by the older generation, and he's trapped by the promise he made to his mother that he would look after Rodney, who's a half-wet and couldn't look after himself. And that is essentially the structure of all the great British sitcoms. All British sitcoms have based themselves upon frustrated people with, again, Steptoe, the younger Steptoe, was exactly the same as well, had an aspiration. He would quote Shakespeare. He was always trying to take out a posh bird, and then he'd come back and find his father visibly darning his socks, and it would all just crumple in front of his eyes. It was an endless iteration of these frustrations of any hope that he might be able to drag himself out of what would not even now pass for working class in this country. I mean, American sitcoms, even Roseanne had a house to die for God's sake, let alone where the Friends lived in New York. Steptoe and Son had a house to die in. In fact, all of their possessions had literally come to them after people had died in possession of them, you know. So that was the key, and that was the key with all of the great British sitcoms. They are based around grotesques, and Rigsby is another perfect example of that, and his kind of... He's a fabulous character, Rigsby, created by Eric Chappell, who is of Dickensian magnitude and timeless. An extraordinary examination of a particular kind of British awkwardness and like embarrassment around race and sex and dating and everything. But he's trapped like an insect in amber, and that's the essence of it, and that's what is the essence of Del Boy's. And at the end, of course, of Only Fools and Horses, I love John Sullivan, but honestly, you know, discovering the 500-year-old watch that, you know, they finally become millionaires.
No spoilers.
Hey?
No spoilers, please.
Steptoe and Son, they made a follow-up film where he literally fucking kills his father.
Yeah, that wouldn't have made a popular Christmas programme. I mean, by the way, was my Only Fools and Horses a microcosm? Is a question that says, tell me you're at the Battle of Ideas without telling me you're at the Battle of Ideas. It's an interesting question. I never have seen that within it. I would have said they probably all voted for nobody because they didn't want any government. They just wanted to be able... basically, as Simon rightly points out, and it's very difficult to pull the two apart, Steptoe and Son and Only Fools and Horses in many ways, particularly because of the pathos. But they were anti-government, they were anti-establishment. They were living on the breadline and they were surviving. They weren't criminals. In fact, during the time of Only Fools and Horses' early popularity in the late 80s, I think Thatcher's government, a Conservative MP, who I wouldn't be able to name now, criticised Only Fools and Horses for making, you know, criminality popular. That it wasn't true that they were doing so; they were just surviving, and that's why I don't really buy into this microcosm thing. I think they were anti-establishment, anti-system, and very funny and great at Christmas. Remember what Christmas was like.
Right, just as a slight aside, almost like Call of Truth, what do people think? Has anyone got anything to say on why there aren't any great sitcoms now? What's happened to the sitcoms?
Yeah, Chris.
Can we have
Or am I wrong?
Sam Bates and Jesse Armstrong would have been my second choice. Perhaps I should have gone with that. Peep Show's like it's like biblical scripture. You can just quote things. I've even got my mother saying, "People, you can't trust people. People voted for Coldplay." I've fluffed up the line. Oh God. People voted for Coldplay and voted for the Nazis, you can't trust people. The point is that I think that's really... It depends what's the point of a sitcom. I think it's like to capture to show this is what reality's like, in my opinion. I think they do that brilliantly.
I think something has changed dramatically. I can't speak to the quality of the sitcoms, although I don't watch any myself anymore, the British ones. I think some of the American ones are good. But clearly what has changed is that we don't all watch TV together. The point of sitcoms 9 times out of 10 was that they were an intergenerational situation. The parents felt trapped by the kids felt trapped by the parents, and they had bad neighbours and all the rest of it. Nowadays, even if everyone's in the same room, they're studying a second screen on their lap most often. And so there is no longer that need to sort of to see yourself reflected back at you, you know. And also, I suppose, to some extent, things like The Office kind of did for it as well, because they seem to sort of just unpack it so thoroughly, you know, possibly, that it's hard to just do something innocently again like that.
So once that satire had happened, it's difficult to go back.
Yeah, but that's, I don't know, that's like, I haven't thought that through, because in a way The Office wasn't really satirising sitcom, it was satirising fly-on-the-wall documentaries, so I suppose that's not quite true. Brilliant piece of work.
Got the in-betweeners as well.
Yeah, the in-betweeners, yeah. The in-betweeners is good. I think, I suppose what The Office did, Simon, is it deconstructed.
That was the word I was trying to...
Yeah.
I'll give you that one.
I do... I think another factor might just be a generational thing, is that as you get older, it's harder to make you laugh because you've heard the joke before and you've seen the devices before. And so, like, I can look at stuff that my kids are watching and I just think it's awful. But they're sitting there roaring with laughter, and they might be in, 40 years' time nostalgic about the sitcoms of their youth in the same way that we are about the ones we grew up with. I don't know.
I give you the real reason now? Sorry, that was so combative. I don't know why I
also
started.
TV commissioning is shit.
Go on, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah. The real reason is, of course, the times that we live in have cancelled all joy and all humour, all edginess. And you can prove this very simply by the fact that Friends is now considered offensive to the millennials. And technically, I am a millennial, but I strongly disavow this position. I mean, Friends was the most fluffy kind of, it's 6 p.m, I've come home from a gruelling school day amongst the farmers' sons and thugs of Cumbria. I'm using a generic example. I'm just trying to recover and not kill myself. I'll put Friends on because it's totally light and fluffy. Now it's beyond the pale, which is so obscene and pathetic. How could you possibly have comedy in such an environment? I'm out. Thank you.
I'd just like to say that I'm with Mr. Evans, Galton and Simpson, comic geniuses. I think at one point somebody said it was Harold Pinter with laughs. And on the situation comedy, I think you've got to remember that when Hancock's Half Hour was on the radio, as I understand it, it was the first radio series where there was no musical interlude. They just played the story right the way through. There wasn't somebody coming on singing a song, or, even the Goons had Ray Ellington, didn't they, coming on? So, for me, yes, definitely Galton and Simpson.
Interestingly, radio comedy was all verbal.
What does that mean?
I'd just like to comment on I know this is the subject about 5 minutes ago. I'm just trying to go. Regarding the international of comedy. From my accent, you can probably tell I've lived somewhere else. But I was born here, and I went to the United States as a young child and was very desperate to understand my Englishness, such as it was. That started with Stanley Holloway monologues. So I learned Albert and the Lion, and I knew the whole thing all the way through. I think I probably still do.
I knew that when I was 8 because my dad made me do it in the school show.
We all have our crosses to bear. It's just true. But as a teenager, though, it was Monty Python that showed up on PBS in New York City. And I got it, and it just resonated with me. And my friends in school just didn't get it. It didn't translate in many ways. They saw it and they thought they couldn't understand what was funny about it. That and the Avengers with Diana Rigg, but for very different reasons.
And this is one for me. I've just got a little anecdote. Is my dad used to live in the States, and I remember going over as a teenage lad watching public service broadcast television, and they used to have these evenings where they would raise money for the TV station. And they had one evening where they'd have a 13-year-old girl sort of twizzing things around and somebody juggling. They said, right, unless we raise another $10,000, we will not put on another Monty Python. And you have to watch this. Until they raise the money and they put on another Monty Python. And then they put on someone juggling until they raise enough money to put another Monty Python on. So I can relate to that.
Right, so speaking of international, of course you have Mr. Bean, but one of the real reasons I love Rowan Atkinson is because he masters both national comedy and our national psyche in a way which has actually made him a national hero. I don't know if people are aware, but there's his statue in Leicester Square. There's a reason why they had to find a comedian for the Olympics. They picked Rowan Atkinson. But also, if you think about his stand-up and the kind of comedy he does, it is actually very much rooted in our culture. So let's think of some good examples at the top of my head. For instance, first, not the 9 o'clock news. That's where he got his start, where he was doing kind of mocking comedy of what's in the news, right? His sketch on the Conservative Party conference is hilarious to this day. People are even laughing just at the sound of the sketch. So there's this fantastic line where he's effectively like doing a mock of Margaret Thatcher, and she goes, "Now, I like curry, but now that we have the recipe, is there any reason why they need to stay?" And similarly, he then goes, "I've got many friends who are immigrants. They're brown, of course, which is a shame." So, and then of course Blackadder, which ties in with all of like the history, where you've got, Pitt the younger, Pitt the even younger, Pitt the glint in the milkman's eye. So Rowan's sketches are not just international, which is partly what makes him so brilliant, but he's actually a master of our national conversation. And that actually ties in with his break into Hollywood, right? There's only one comedian here who has actually headlined by himself multiple Hollywood films, and that's Rowan Atkinson. And we can make the argument, that's because Mr. Bean, it's physical comedy. That's actually not true, because you've got Johnny English as well. So Rowan Atkinson is the only star here, not just to headline a Hollywood film, but to do so across multiple distinct characters.
Oh.
He's acting, though. He's an actor.
Right.
Well, no, because he writes a lot of the scripts.
Yep. Can we have the microphone here, please?
Yep. Thanks. Can I first start by saying how utterly disappointing it was to discover that a balloon debate format is not that each of the panelists inhale a helium balloon before expressing their argument. It was devastating to hear this. Next year, perhaps. But what I'd like to do is to invite each of the panelists to say what their second and third choices would have been if they'd not gone with their first choices, and to do it as if they just inhaled from a helium balloon.
Well, maybe let's do that at the end. Otherwise, I think the voting's going to get really confusing because we're going to be voting.
This is not an attempt at PR.
Anyone? Any other questions? Right, a couple more points, questions, and then we're going to go to a vote.
Yeah, my issue with John Sullivan winning this is that
turn his mic off.
Was that Only Fools started too early as well as finishing too late. We've already heard the point that it overran, but I understood that the first couple of series were not well watched, so they used to put it on after EastEnders because that way the audience would hopefully still be watching and carry on and they would see it, but it didn't really get going. The other interesting thing about the originality of the characters, my dad grew up reading Billy Bunter stories, and he thinks Del Boy was essentially a grown-up Billy Bunter. Billy Bunter thought he was good with women and he wasn't. He lied a lot. And there's one episode, or one book rather, where he goes abroad and gets mistaken for a gangster. Very much like the plots of Del Boy. The thing about John Cleese was that everything he did, like the number of episodes of Fawlty Towers, was sort of perfectly packaged, which is maybe why we're still laughing at them now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to dispute those points. I mean, originality, if we're talking about originality amongst the panel's choices, then Norm Macdonald would feature heavily, as maybe would John Cleese. I think with regards to Simon and I's choices, what those writers were able to do was translate what was happening in those communities for us all to understand and relate to. And of course, that would have come from a whole background of different characters across different eras. So I wouldn't want to take that away from John Sullivan or any other writer, for instance. And maybe there is a link between Billy Bunter and Del Boy. I shall do an extensive Channel 4 documentary series about that. I do hope. But no, I mean, I wouldn't want to accept that just carte blanche. It's an interesting point, but I still think whilst it didn't start so popular as it finished, that doesn't take away anything either. I might well have chosen Seinfeld as something that didn't start well but finished absolutely brilliantly, and those characters are replicated all across American comedy throughout the year. So it's an interesting point, but I don't think it detracts at all from John Sullivan's genius. Round of applause.
Hey! Right, we're now going to go to a vote. Okay, so you can vote as many times as you like. Obviously, don't.
What is this, America?
Don't. Are you going to accept the results, Simon? Will you accept the results? I know Nick won't.
Needs to be too big to rig. Too big to rig.
I'll tell you what, right? Whoever's part of a community can postal vote now.
So we vote for who we like or who we don't like.
Right, so you're going to vote for. So, that's right, thank you. So you're going to vote for
Nick.
The comedians that you. Well, you're going to vote for the comedian that you think is the best comic genius in the world ever. But you're at this stage, you're also thinking, who do I want to keep on the stage? So it's a bit Big Brothery. It's a bit I'm a Celebrity. Okay?
Terrible way to put it.
So you can vote multiple times, but it's really who do you want to keep on here to fight it out? Okay? And then at the end, you're voting to keep them in, and the people with the lowest votes go. Okay? So, who would like to vote for? Excuse me, can you give me a hand counting? I can't do physical action. I can't count. So, the first vote, hands in the air please, for Nick and Norm MacDonald.
The best. Oh, it's almost the whole room.
One hand each.
Tried to sabotage. This one's way better. No, they sabotaged me the whole way.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18,
Solid.
19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. I'm making 24 was right. I trust you.
There's way more. Quick head count, it's about 50.
You want to recount?
Yeah, recount.
Okay, right.
Too big to rig.
You count from where you like, but you just check what I'm saying.
I got bored, but it's at least 30.
Number one.
Avoid accounting. I actually can't say anyway.
26 it is, okay, right. Put your hands down, please, and for Dominic, Frisby, and John, please. No, you're not allowed to. You're a count yourself.
I'm on. Well, we're going to... Does anyone... It's just the English audience, isn't it? They're not comedy.
We've done this one in a row.
Philistines.
Yes, you did. You bombed the Lebanon.
I'm trying to think, instead of hamster, I'm trying to think of
64. Hands down for Paul and John Sullivan. Paul and John Sullivan.
This is humiliating.
Very sorry.
You're up against it there, Paul. He's not very main.
19, I'll make it.
Can you?
You should have been down the road at the Battle of Feelings.
Yeah, it was when you said he makes us cry.
Okay, next up, Cressida.
It's not the greatest.
Louis C.K.
Oh, I feel all right now.
It must be the wanking thing.
And then what we'll do is when we come back, just a minute each to restate the case. Yeah? 2 minutes. That's 11. Simon, Galton and Simpson. You said you could. People can vote. It's fine. It's fine. Sorry, we're getting a clear result here.
My aunt's husband is chairman of the Tony Hancock Society. So I was going to bring up, but I'll save my
That would
argument.
be your uncle.
30. No, I don't class him as that.
Doesn't met the criteria.
But for a long time they weren't married, and then eventually they were, but we'd all stopped talking to her, so I'm like, what is that an uncle? But Hancock was really the genius there, so that's why I think that's cheating. So I'm third, that's where I'm going. It's not so bad. How many survived? 2? Really? I thought 2 survived. Oh, well, we're on next one beaten, I think, so I might have to really come up with something. If it is.
Right, and lastly, Rowan Atkinson.
Thank you.
Non-comedians of the world unite.
It's going to be, it looks to me like it's a clean system.
Yeah, and then, the big James Cleverly.
Are we going down to 3?
Tiebreak. There's a tiebreak. There's a tiebreak. We're going to have to have a revote. It's 238.
You're on 38.
You're on 38. Hang on a second. Are we right? Oh, no, that's right. No,
You don't need a tiebreak.
Sorry, my mistake. Which rank? 50.
No, you're
My mic was quiet. I couldn't get any of my quick, my mic was quiet. That's because Norm's an obscure choice. I can't believe these people.
I did better in the bit.
Right, so in reverse order, I'm afraid I'm going to ask to leave the stage Cressida with 11 votes, Louis C.K. Please, a round of applause. And next, Paul, promoting John Sullivan with 19 votes. Please, a round of applause.
Try next year, Paul.
And then Nick.
This is bullshit.
Norman. You accept the result, Nick? Okay, great. Okay, right, so now down to the final 3. Dominic's going to restate the case.
Okay, so I'm to restate the case for John Cleese. He was both as a performer and as a writer. He was a key player in one of the greatest sketch shows of all time. He was a key player in one of the greatest comic films of all time, Life of Brian. And he wrote and starred in what I consider the greatest sitcom of all time. And if you look specifically, there were only ever 12 episodes of Fawlty Towers, and there were some brilliant episodes, Basil the Rat, communication problems, Mrs. Richards with that amazing performance from Joan Sanderson as the deaf woman, you know, with the charisma to stand up. The other thing about John Cleese is he was just so big and he had so much charisma in his prime. But for me, The Germans is the single greatest 30 minutes of comedy, even today, that you will ever watch. And it's a very rare thing that an art reaches perfection. And for me, The Germans, it's just 3 scenes. 3 scenes take up that whole 30 minutes. And every little thing leads to the next thing, so that his complete deterioration and insanity by the end makes total sense within the context of the episode. And why he's marching up, you know, it's because the antlers landed on his head, and then he's seen the Black Doctor and all these things, and that's why he ends up walking around doing that incredible performance. And it mixes physical comedy, it mixes satire, it mixes intellect. The marriage of farce with, you know, the tradition of farce from the theatre and farce and this new medium of sitcom. And what was so brilliant about it is, on top of everything else, that episode was a metaphor for Britain at that time and its inability to move on beyond the war. And so for me, that was 30 minutes of perfection. And if I would challenge you even now to find comedy and farce distilled into something as perfect as that.
Right.
So we now see that we get an appreciation for physical comedy now, because we got someone who decided to stand up too. So
I mentioned it before.
Well, no, because you just stood up like I did the first time.
Oh, I see.
Now, you may present the Germans, but I present the French. Back where in his stand-up, when he's Toby the Devil, he's standing in silence, he's like, I'm Toby the Devil. The French, are you here? But the main point of Rowan Atkinson and why I actually quite like him, and you can compare him to John Cleese in this respect, is that John Cleese had to work as part of a group. He wasn't an individual. Rowan Atkinson is able to do more work by himself. Moreover, Rowan Atkinson really embodied what it meant to be a defender of free speech and the principles behind comedy. John Cleese only really got into the free speech game after people came to him. Rowan Atkinson had this kind of like classy approach, hence why his videos are so popular, where he was able to really mobilise and actually thought genuine laws and proposals which would have undermined free expression. This is partly why John Cleese isn't really the same kind of national hero in the same way as Rowan Atkinson. Also, I just want to quickly mention, and this is a key point really here, which is when you got Rowan Atkinson and John Cleese together, who did they actually pick to do the jokes, and who did they pick to be the straight man? They picked Rowan Atkinson. So between them as a group, they recognised that Rowan had the greater capacity to articulate an audience and make them laugh. And also, finally, the thing about Monty Python as well is I think, as Rowan Atkinson famously said in Not the 9 o'clock News, people forget how often the gags actually didn't work. There's a few really funny moments in Monty Python, but the thing about it is it really lacks consistency. Rowan Atkinson has consistency. You can watch any episode of Mr. Bean, most episodes of Blackadder, and really get that like core laugh. So that's my case. Thank you.
I will remain seated if you don't mind. That's interesting. I mean, in a way, that last, your address, your proposition, underscores exactly the point I'm making. Every comedian that comes along builds on the successes and identifies the flaws and shortcomings of the previous generation. I would agree with you that Not the 9 o'clock News was more consistent than Monty Python. When you watch a whole Monty Python episode now, it can be very patchy, and of course they famously attempted to overcome the perennial problem of the punchline when you write sketch comedy by having Graham Chapman dressed as a major appear in suddenly on screen and say, right, this is getting silly, and it was kind of funny once or twice, but then it got tiresome. They learned from that. Not the 9 o'clock News and Rowan Atkinson's one-man show, which I think predated Not the 9 o'clock News and got him the job. Extraordinary, absolutely brilliant comedy. And you'll get no quarrel from me about the perfection of Fawlty Towers. And I don't think it's just the Germans. I think probably 7 or 8 of those 12 episodes would qualify for a 10 out of 10. They'd be the Nadia Comaneci of sitcom. But they all build on the foundations created by Steptoe and Hancock. That is my proposition, in the same way that I doubt many of us now settle down very often in the evening to leaf our way through the Iliad or the Odyssey. Even in the new fashionable Emily Wilson translations, they drag a little bit, if we're honest. We know that there are some patchy, there are some exciting moments, there are some great caricatures, but it's dated, of course it is. It's 2,500 years old, but we know also they are the marble slabs on which the entire edifice of Western literary tradition has been built. And you can keep going back. And the fact is, the 20th century of British comedy was just nonpareil, an unbelievable wealth. I could very easily have made a case for Peter Cook, whom John Cleese considered to be the greatest of his generation. He famously said that Cook, he would struggle, him and Chapman, they would spend 6 hours trying to write a 3-minute sketch. It usually took Peter Cook 3 minutes to write a 3-minute sketch. It was basically how fast could his hand move, at that time in his peak. He probably had a slightly shorter span than Cleese, but a man of extraordinary brilliance, charisma, incredible originality, charm, and even, unusually for a comedian, sexual allure as well. But there's a whole other rabbit hole there. Sorry? Yeah, I did not know that. But anyway, listen, it's an incredible... What we have, I hope, demonstrated this afternoon is that we have a legacy to be enormously proud of. I would say Galton and Simpson are as much of a foundational stone as you can create an argument for in that. But, of course, everything is built on everything else. Buster Keaton still makes me laugh. Laurel and Hardy still make me laugh. Chaplin strikes me as sentimental now, but who knows, he may come back. I find something just fundamentally appealing about the frustrated, wriggling grotesques, the Rigsbys, the sheer, deluded airs and graces of Hancock has never quite been equalled. It's so perfect for the British sense of humour to recognise their own failings, past, future, and anticipated with full confidence, and that to me makes them the ex-British comedy. Atkinson and Cleese blessed with an enormous intellect and cultivated in the very best seats of learning. Galton and Simpson met one another in a tuberculosis ward, and that for me tips the scales.
Can I just make a point of order? Rowan Atkinson did not write Blackadder.
Oh, actually, he did. He's credited as writing 9 episodes.
He has some writing credits, but he was not the main writer.
Oh, so he does have writing credits on Blackadder.
He has credits, but he was not the main writer.
I think there's some deception and some a little bit of uncertainty here from the John Cleese fan.
No, there's no uncertainty.
Ben Elton and Richard Curtis wrote the Great Mass of all 4 series.
Yeah.
And Richard Curtis, to some extent.
And Richard Curtis wrote Mr. Bean as well.
Yeah. And Mel Smith directed it. It was very, very good.
Co-wrote. See, we get all the slander at the end where it's hard to respond. Because they know that their argument is weaker.
Right. Does anyone have any points they want to make? Any things they want to say to the panel? Any questions? Or are we going to go for the final vote?
Let's go for it.
Okay.
I think it says greatest, not most popular.
Wait for the mic. Go on.
Just a quick point that it's greatest, not most popular.
Okay. Someone making great. Right. Here, lady here.
Clockwise, I actually prefer Clockwise to Life of Brian. It's a work of genius, Clockwise.
Yeah, I agree.
Although, in fairness, it was written by Michael
Frayn.
Right,
Yeah.
Michael Frayn.
Frayn, yeah.
Also, John Cleese wrote the best ever party political broadcast. And I think it was something like most people would vote for whatever party it was if they thought they stood a chance of winning. And then he analysed how they could possibly win if nobody would vote for them because they didn't stand a chance of winning. It was comedic genius, but it was also foundational, really, I think, for a lot of...
yeah.
Well, yeah.
In the days when the SDP and the Lib Dems were cool. Yeah. Yeah, it was.
Well, I have a question. I'm not an expert on comedy, but whether or not it's relevant to the conversation, how many times you would watch the comedy. So, for example, I've watched John Cleese, and he's very funny. But unlike Only Fools and Horses and Rowan Atkinson, you know, we all remember the teddy bear scene. Is he going to cut the head off the teddy bear? Is he not going to cut the head off the teddy bear? You can watch them over and over and over again, as with Fools and Horses, and they still make you laugh out loud, even though you know what the punchline is. So I just want to introduce that into the conversation. And I'll leave my comments about the sexual appeal of the comedians to later.
It's just yesterday I'm working with the Japanese guys trying to do a presentation on British humour, and I literally showed him Mr. Bean and Blackadder, so I feel as though you've been spying on me. And you have also, because 4 weeks ago, as I did the Sunday dinner, I had to spoon the gravy out because it didn't pour. And I said, do you remember when it used to move around? So just saying, these things last, they last.
I take issue with the idea that because someone is picked as the straight man, it means they're not as good a comedian. I think possibly it's easier to be funny, well, if you're in the funny role, but Rowan Atkinson being picked to be the weird one against John Cleese doesn't, I think, stand up as an argument that he's a better comedian. Sorry, Ethan.
It was just one sketch at one time. I wouldn't read anything into it.
He's scared.
Sorry, is your hand up?
In support of John Cleese and Fawlty Towers, I went to see the staged version a few weeks ago, and there was a huge range of ages from about 6 to 96. Now, if that doesn't tell you something about how it stood both the test of time and an intergenerational comedy, then what does? And a friend of mine went back the next night, but she couldn't wait to see it again.
It's good, is it?
So I think that really does say something about it.
It's good.
You couldn't tell the
Hello.
visuals to be honest. They were good.
Yeah, I just thought I'd stick my oar in and say about the intergenerational appeal of sitcoms and the importance that that has. Sorry. I'm 22 and I grew up obsessed with old sitcoms, and one of them in particular was Fawlty Towers. And it was because it had such a range of different characters. And yes, Manuel was a stereotype, but my family is Spanish, and there is an element of truth in most stereotypes. And the ability to be able to laugh at oneself is quite important for not losing one's mind. But yeah, intergenerational appeal, the fact that you can have 4 generations in a room watching it. My little cousin is about to be 12, his brother is 6. They've been able to sit through it, and they are the generation that are like that sit obsessed with screens. So yeah, keeping their attention span for 30 minutes is that's effort.
My eldest son, gave me this long lecture about how anything old isn't funny and all old stuff is just rubbish. And he would have been about 14 at the time. So I sat him down and we watched, it was The Hamster, and he peed himself. He literally peed himself.
Question for the panel. Ethan, you've attributed a lot of Rowan Atkinson's merit to being the greatest of all time to his kind of proactive advocacy for free speech and its protection, as well as his comedic merits. So I suppose the question for Simon and Dominic would be, how are you... forgive me because I'm almost asking you an unanswerable question, which what's your metric for John Cleese and Galton and Simpson for being the greatest of all time?
Well, I to the extent within the way you frame the question, I do totally recognise Rowan Atkinson's great and tireless work to protect freedom of speech and in particular freedom to commit blasphemy for comedic purposes, which was his initial focus. He's done great stand-up work on that front, and also in defending the internal combustion engine again. From equally pernicious siege mentality. But I wouldn't be able to defend or promote Galton and Simpson's work on that front. It wasn't an issue in those days. They died before there was any... No, there's no other. Simply the comedy that they wrote, the characters they created, and the impact it had on Britain at that time. You know, Britain coming out of living opposite bomb sites and so on. But as I say, I get it, but I don't think it's relevant really to the topic under discussion. There are plenty of other comedians who have been absolutely, despicable cowards in the teeth. I mean, I think Sacha Baron Cohen has gone so far down in my estimation now that you have to lift a manhole cover to find him. But his scurrilous work on behalf of the ADL is absolutely despicable in my view. But nevertheless, some extraordinary great comedy characters he created. They don't disappear just because he's turned into a voice of anyway.
Sorry, Simon. What was that? Yeah, I mean, I agree with Simon. I like Sacha Baron Cohen a lot less than I did for those same reasons. But I think if we're just judging a comedian on his greatest, on whether he's great or not, I think you have to judge it on his comedy and not his other work, which is not entirely relevant. And in the case of Cleese, you asked what my metrics are. Well, at the beginning, I said, you know, he's got to be a writer and a performer, and Cleese is both. And, you know, you've got stand-up, sketch show, sitcom, comic film. Then you've got, you know, physical comedy, intellectual comedy, satire. You've got all these different types of comedy within those four genres. And while Cleese, to my knowledge, never really attempted stand-up, he was involved in one of the greatest sketch shows, one of the greatest comic films, in my view, the greatest sitcom, and he was a brilliant performer in a variety of different comic performances, ranging from satire and intellectual to the physical and the lowbrow. And for me, and still funny today. So those are my metrics.
Okay, so let me rattle these off where Rowan wins all of them. So firstly, popularity, international and national. Writer, performer. We've just heard that stand-up Cleese never did. Atkinson did, as well as doing physical and intellectual comedy. Actually defending the principles of free speech and comedy outside of just the comedic realm as well. Rowan does that. On top of that, the ability to... Actually, do I even need to say any more? That's it.
Right. Can I just say something? Okay, John Cleese and Michael Palin versus Malcolm Muggeridge and the Bishop, whatever. They won hands down because I remember that programme live.
Bishop of Southwark.
Thank you. That programme live was a real defence of free speech against the anti-sacrilege, anti-blaspheming, you know, you're going to go to hell for this. And they actually wiped the floor with St Malcolm of Muggeridge and the Bishop of Southwark. It was an absolute no-brainer.
We even saw that in Australia.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
And just on Cleese, never did stand up, but I think you could probably get away with counting his eulogy at Graham Chapman's funeral.
Yeah.
That is hilarious, and it is basically stand-up comedy.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, stand-up just wasn't... In the 70s, I was arguing for Cleese in his prime, which is basically the 70s. You know, stand-up wasn't the art form then. You know, it was working man's clubs and all that kind of thing. It wasn't then what it is now. You weren't like stand-up specials on Netflix or anything like that.
That eulogy is absolutely
Yeah.
Great, so you've all heard the cases, and it's now down to the final vote. Only one person is going to survive in this balloon. You can only have one... Or two. One pair, or an individual. So now it's the final vote, but you only vote for one person now, okay? And you're only allowed to use one arm. Okay? So if you'd like to raise your arm for John Cleese, we shall count you now. Or do you think we show of hands? Do you think it's going to do it? And we don't have to count. All right, okay. Hands down, please. Galton and Simpson. And lastly, Rowan Atkinson. And I declare the winner, John Cleese. Could you please give Dominic Frisby a standing ovation, which is his prize, because I haven't brought anything else for him. They love the adulation, whooping and hollering. Thank you, Dominic.
To the fellow guests.